This is Johnny Detroit, pregame.com, the people's champ. I'm here with Uncle Dave Essler, one of the favorites over at the Pregame Pros and also in the community at pregameforums.com. Dave, you with me?
I am. I hope
Dave,
so,
that's
anyway.
Dave Essler. I'm Johnny Detroit. What we're going to do is it's 8:01 Eastern Standard Time. As always, we're going to begin at 8:05. Give people a couple minutes to log in and join us, and we'll be closing up at 9 o'clock. And just to kind of go over everything that's going to happen tonight, we're going to go over who is Dave Essler. We're going to do a little Q&A. We're going to get into Dave's best bet for the weekend, give you guys a coupon to use over at pregamepros.com, and then close up shop. And then next week we'll be back Wednesday from 8 to 9. I haven't filled the spot yet, so stay tuned for that. Also, the video of the audio and the PowerPoint presentation will be loaded into the community by tomorrow morning. So real quick, Dave, if you want to send a tweet out to your followers, let them know we're going to begin in a couple of minutes. Anyone listening, want to grab yourself a brew, hit the bathroom real quick, whatever you got to do. This is Johnny Detroit. We'll be back in 3 minutes to officially start the Pregame Pro webinar with Pregame Pro Dave Essler. What do you think of Michigan Notre Dame, Dave? While we're waiting the 3 minutes, we could babble like normal people. I mean, everyone's going to hear us, so no,
Tough game.
yeah. I'm just, one thing that has me concerned, and, like I said, I'm a Michigan homer, is when they played Alabama. I mean, Stevie Wonder could see all they had to do is make Denard pass. Because if you could stop him running, and almost all the games that Michigan has lost or hasn't been able to do anything, it's if you could stop him from running all over the place and make him pass, there's really not much they could do. I mean, he's a good kid, athletic, he's quick as shit, but dude, he's not a good quarterback at all.
Did you really think they had a chance to beat Alabama?
Not at all. I thought Alabama was going to beat them, and then I felt, being somebody from Michigan, and this goes into people who follow teams locally or read a lot of local stuff, I really thought in my mind that Nick Saban being the coach was worth at least a touchdown. And
Yeah,
the
I
reason,
think he is too.
well, not just for
I
being
had a
not
I
just
had
for
a
being
bunch of
Nick
I had a bunch
Saban,
of
I felt because of the fact Nick Saban used to coach at State. Because he's an arrogant dude. He's always has been. Not saying he's not a great coach, but he has an ego. So you got a guy like that. No matter how good Michigan State is, and even after them owning Michigan all these years, like the last couple years, it's Michigan first, Michigan State second. Even if Michigan's subpar to Michigan State, Michigan is still number one in this area. Local radio,
oh, no
recruiting.
doubt.
So all of those years of him trying to say recruit some stud from, one of the local high schools, and Michigan goes in and swoops him up, and all the local press and everything else always being about Michigan, you don't think that resonates in the back of his head? And now he's in the position with a much better team and, winning the national championships. You don't think he wanted to beat Michigan's ass just a little bit to say, you know what, all those years I was at State and I was your little brother, well, you know what? I'm going to smack you around. I felt that was worth an extra touchdown by itself.
Yeah, probably. I just didn't see him doing it in the first game. I guess I didn't. I figured Alabama would win, but that handily I wasn't sure. Mainly because Hoke is a good coach, and he did have 6 months to prepare for one game. So
Right.
I thought they'd play a little better. And I had a bunch of my clients and other people that I know from Alabama that are diehard Alabama fans, but they're also realists. And they told me the Tide was going to cover that with ease, but I dismissed it because I figured it was just Homer talking.
Right. Well, real quick, to the people who tuned in right now, just a quick FYI, we have a bunch of questions that were sent in advance. We had a handful of people who said they couldn't make the webinar, but since we archived these, they wanted to follow up and watch the video tomorrow. So for anyone who has been part of the webinars, or for those who haven't, using the pop-up module for the GoToWebinar control panel, you could submit your questions to me, and I'll load them in the queue. Every single webinar we've had, We've always ran out of time to get to all the questions. I have about 6 or 7 questions already preloaded. So if you have a question, you want to shoot that in now. And if anyone has any issues or questions on that, you could also use the live chat, and I could check with you personally. So let's get started. This is Johnny Detroit, the People's Champ Pregame Pro webinar with Dave Essler. And what we're going to do now is first, who is Dave Essler? Dave Essler, you know, he's known as a guy that knows his football, especially the college football. But you know what? He was the first pregame NFL hit and contest winner over in the community. He's had 3 straight winning Major League Baseball seasons at pregame, picking up over 100+ units over the last 3 years and close to 24 units on this year. What's more impressive about that is the fact that pregame is we rate games at 1, 2, and 3 unit. So unlike some other people in the industry, if they go 0 for 5, they try firing some 30-unit game of the year, and they win that, and now all of a sudden they say they're up 24 units because they kind of have their own unit system in their head that's not realistic. So for me, to win 100+ units over 3 years, when the most you could wager is 3 units on a game, is quite impressive. So Dave, I'm going to hand it over to you. What am I missing on who is Dave Essler?
Say that again?
What am I missing? Who is Dave Essler?
Wow. We only have an hour. I don't know. My life's an open book, everything I throw out on Twitter, so there isn't a whole lot people don't know. Who am I? I just bet sports, try to win, and you know what? I try to treat my clients and everybody else I come across the way I think I would want to be treated. Because as some of these people that have been around for 3 years might remember and might not, at one time I was on the other side of the fence when I was overseas, and I was buying picks, so I know how I would want to be treated, and that's how I try to run my business.
And one thing I could say about Dave as being one of the owners of Pregame is, you know, besides being responsible for customer service, the community, I also handle, you know, the Pregame Pro section of the website. And I will have to say this, is Dave is what you see is what you get. He doesn't sugarcoat anything. He's straightforward. He tells you what's on his mind, and he will never just say something to say it because you want to hear it. So to me, that's about as legitimate as it gets. And, you know, I've talked offline with Dave, and, you know, he's a guy that you could literally talk football or baseball with for hours and go toe to toe. You know, there's a lot of times I've met people in this industry or think they know a lot. And once they get across the couple bullet points that anybody somewhat following the team could sit and shoot across, they don't have much to say. But, you know, Dave could, he could talk the talk and walk the walk, I guess you could say. So that being said, before we get to the Q&A, what I want to do is do a quick poll. It's essentially, what made you make your first purchase with Dave Essler? We're going to let this run for about a minute and a half. You know, was he on a hot streak? Was it because he was the dollar handicapper, which is a way a lot of people, you know, get involved with the pregame pros? They make that initial investment for $1. Was he someone you followed in the community? Was it long-term records? Or do you have no idea what the hell made you follow Dave in the first place? And one of the things I like to use this for is I like to use this information to go back to my pregame pros and tell them, you know what? Since we've been doing these webinars, to be honest, and don't just vote this because I'm saying this, the majority of the people have made their first purchase with someone at pregame. This is one of the things that I pride myself on, is the fact that they follow them in the community. And one of the things that makes us different than everyone else is you could talk to the guy whose face is up there when you're buying their picks in the community. There's not many sites that when someone loses a game of the year or has some shitty run, that night or that day you can go in the community and actually talk to Dave Essler or talk to Vegas Runner. So when I see that the initial purchase for the most part was made because they followed him in the community, that makes me go back to the pros and let them know how important it is for them to interact and communicate with the audience. So we're going to go about another 30 seconds if you haven't voted. So far, data, so you know, 67%, I don't know if you can see the poll numbers, 67% of the people so far voting said that their initial purchase through you was because they followed you in the forums. And, you know, I remember Dave back in the day when he was just a forum user. He was one of the most popular people in the community. and some of his forum posts were getting thousands and thousands of views every time he posted. So I guess that's something that attributes to you, Dave, that your ability in the forums to communicate and brand yourself through being you, I guess, and not just an image with some slick marketing has made you a successful pregame pro. Is there anything you want to add before I close the pro and we move on to the Q&A?
Well, yeah, actually, if 67% of the people said I was the $1 handicapper, I was going to ask if I could just always be the $1 capper.
33% their first time buying Uncle Dave Essler was when you were the dollar. 67% made their first purchase because they really respected what you were doing in the community. And to me, that is something that we're pitching a shutout. It's been perfect so far. Every single webinar, overwhelmingly, it's been solely due to the interaction in the community, and that's something to be proud of. So I'm going to close up the poll. And what we're going to do now is we're going to get right into the Q&A. That's something that, like I said, in all the webinars so far has taken up most of the time. So, Dave, I'm going to go question by question. Anyone listening, if you have a question, you could use the pop-up control panel. You could submit your question to me, and I'll ask Big Dave. So, first one, Dave, how did you get involved with pregame.com? First as a user, and then as a pregame pro?
As a user, I think maybe we talked about this a minute ago, maybe not, but I've always bet on sports since I was in my teens, like most of us have, but I'm not in my teens anymore. But I was overseas about 4 years ago, and it was about 10 time zones away, and I actually bought picks from pregame. So that's how I found pregame and got involved in it. And then when I got back and started posting on pregame, and it just all kind of migrated into where it is now. Really, it wasn't the plan to sell picks. I kind of hate that word, but that's what it is. Never even entered my mind as a thought back then.
That kind of goes into the next question, Dave. It said, how did you first get involved in handicapping, and at what point did you realize that you were actually good at this, not only to bet where it wasn't for entertainment, and honestly, a lot of people, they bet and they know maybe they don't win at the end of the year, but they enjoy it. But to actually be able to bet and know you could do it for a living, and then bet and do it for a living, and then actually sell the information. So I guess it's twofold. At what point do you think you realized that you had an edge over the lines and the bookmakers?
Well, I'm not sure that I do anymore. Just when you think you do, you lose it. When I guess the bottom line is, when did I think I was probably good enough to publicly sell information? Was Razorback fan actually started a thread way back when about Dave Essler for pro status, and it went on for days and days and days, and the majority of responses were, yeah, that would be great. So here I am. When did I realize I had an edge? I don't know. I saw that question about when did you know you were pretty good? Well, I don't look at it as that way. I look at it as, am I good enough to win over the long haul? Because a lot of people are. So I don't know that I don't know that I really think I'm pretty good now, because I think when you think you are is when you stop learning, and there's something to learn every day.
And that's a good point, and that's one of the things, whether it's Twitter, whether it's the community, whether it's watching a line service or whatever it is handicapping now, things are constantly changing. And every time that someone has an edge, or there's some system or a power rating, and the books feel that they're slowly losing their edge, they up their game. And this isn't something where you could read a book from 1972, like certain, to me, almost the analogy is poker. When poker first started getting big, the people that would just read Doyle Brunson's book and they follow that basic premise, for the most part, when the whole world was playing poker at that time, I remember when Moneymaker won, like everybody played poker. You could essentially buy like Sklansky's book and Brunson's book and most likely make money. And that was the extent of your game. But as people got better and people upped their game, and they started adjusting certain strategies, those basic ways of being able to win in the past were no longer valid, and you had to up your game. Next question,
Well,
Dave.
I've noticed that just this year in some of the football lines. I mean, for a lot of years there was a huge edge, and there was not all this information, and there were a lot of I play a lot of home underdogs and underdogs in general. And used to always be able to get more points with certain teams. And I think because the books know that right now, they're just not giving you the points they used to because these people are trying to outthink themselves, and some of the value that used to be there isn't there, and then you have to go back and look the other way. It's almost like college basketball last year when I had a great year and then got crushed in March because I did what I always did, which didn't work. I didn't adjust, and all the favorites just won.
Well, and that's true too. Is there's some handicappers that I follow that once conference play starts, they're not as profitable because certain, like you said, adjustments are made by the books, and even for example, I did some ESPN radio earlier today with RJ, and we were talking about the replacement refs and the fact the amount of points that are being scored, and if you combine all the NFL totals this week, it's actually the most points ever in the history of lines that the totals add up to. Is the books are making adjustments because the amount of pass interference calls. It's the most so far going into this week since 2003. The last couple years, there's been an average of 24 going into this week. I think right now they're at 47. So the totals are edging up like 2 points. So the question is like, are the books making the adjustment that there's going to be value on the under, or haven't they adjusted enough? The books are always adjusting, and that goes back to what you said, is you constantly have to monitor and you're up your game. And speaking of your game, here's another question that just came in, Dave, from the earlier stuff that was sent. What's your worst bad beat story across all sports?
About 20 years ago, I took the Celtics laying about 18 points to the Knicks, which is something I wouldn't ever consider doing now. And the Celtics were ahead by 25 or 30, and the game was actually over. The clocks had read 0. Patrick Ewing was walking off the court at the other end, almost taking his shirt off, and the Knicks threw the ball down, and he dunked it, and they counted the basket. This was sort of pre-tenths of a second, but had that been a close game, they wouldn't have counted the basket. So it wasn't really a bad beat in terms of, it was just I guess it was a bad beat. They counted a basket that in today's game would never have counted. And hence I think I lost by a point.
My biggest one money wise was the Hilton back in 2005 when we were winning outright, and two people below us had the New York Giants over the Dallas Cowboys, and they turned around and scored after getting a pass interference call with about 30 seconds left, and it was about, I think it was $100,000 swing, and a couple of the community members were actually on the team, his honor and the boys, and they ended up splitting first, second, and third 3 ways because of that one play. So we still profited, but I could have checked each of the forum guys who were part of my team for $25,000, and that includes the boys. So, and the other one of mine I'll never forget is I had Arizona over Washington, or Washington over Arizona, and Arizona went the length of the field, and at the last play of the game, their quarterback dove towards the end zone. 2 Washington guys hit him at the 1, and where they hit him, he spun in the air like a top, and he landed it in the end zone as the gun went off, and they scored and covered. And that play actually won the ESPN SB Play of the Year. So it's like I had to watch that damn play from that game through the damn ESPYs, and I remember how sick that game made me. So life experience.
Johnny, I still have to watch the ball go through Buckner's legs. So,
Dave, what life experiences can you attribute to your handicapping style and success?
I saw that, and I guess my answer to that would be raising kids. Because raising kids, I had to develop patience and discipline. And I kind of learned to understate things because screaming at them doesn't work. So I would relate that one life experience is all. Two of my kids are in college, which most people know, but those formative years from 1 to 17, without patience and discipline, and then the other thing about raising kids compared to relating to sports is you just never know what's going to happen. And just when you think you got it figured out, they change the rules. So I think 18 years of raising kids.
For me, is my big ones would be is when I was younger, running the parlay cards and getting involved with bookmakers and kind of seeing how it worked and understanding. I'm not a big fan entirely of the whole contrarian, fading the public, because again, if the books only have a 5% edge, blanket fading the public is never going to work. But I do believe, like, using that somewhat fading of the public, you could factor that in, because you'd always see, especially on the parlay cards that I was running back in the day, there was a bookie I used to work for named, they used to call him Buzzcut Eddie, Bookstore Eddie. He owned a bookstore called Leisure Book Mart over on Warren Avenue in Detroit. And you'd always have those couple games every single week that in the NFL or college that if they didn't go their way, they would get destroyed. And it seemed those games always lost. So even to this day, if it's an overwhelming public game and there's any kind of, like, I'm getting 2 or 3 offshore saying one side, one saying the other, but it's an overwhelming public game, I'll always scratch it off and figure there's enough other games to, focus on. That's one thing for me. And then the other thing is, it's really influenced, is I was lucky enough, even though I'm only 37, is to get in this industry in the beginning when the offshores first went offshore, I guess you could say, and they were just cutting checks to anybody with a website. And before the Bowdogs and the sportsbook.coms, when they had whole teams of marketing departments, back then, as you would call, and it would be the owner, you'd have some lackey, and you would deal with them, and they'd cut you a check, and you'd build these relationships. So you would talk to these guys who were running these sports books, and because of that, even guys that aren't as big or even around as much, like Lenny at Cascade, or Mario at Five Dimes, he's running a credit shop now, is I have these guys on instant message, and hearing what they have to say and how it works in the back end, or I'll see somebody post a thing about a bad line, how should you deal with it? Like, I'll know little things that they keep comments. I've seen the back ends of the customer platform and the fact that they have public or sharp tabs that they profile you, or a little customer comments. So when you call in, the ticket writer will see comments like, this dude's a douchebag, or, he bets bad lines, or, this guy told us a couple times when the lines are bad, and maybe they'll let something slide that you do or cancel a bet for you. So to me, I guess dealing with street bookmakers and being involved in this industry would be my 2 life experiences that have helped me the most. So going to the next question, Dave, if allowed to give one statement of advice regarding sports investing, what would it be?
Take the emotion out of it. Short, sweet, that's my statement. I mean, I think so many people overthink the problem and put too much emotion into it. And if you don't take the emotion out of it and treat it as a business with numbers and pay attention, it'll eat you alive. I mean, that's unfortunately probably how a lot of people come to pregame, because they've had so much emotion involved in it and kind of done their own thing, betting on your home team, or betting the team because Lee Corso said to. You just got to take the emotion out of it and do what you know, rather than, like for me, betting against New England, or you got to take the emotion out of it.
And to me, the emotion thing goes 2 ways. As it goes, like you said, is the emotional aspect of an attachment to a team or a certain player. But it also, to me, is an emotional attachment to the money. Is if you do the math, and even if you take a percentage, if you're going to hit 55, 56, 57% long term in, basketball or football, the amount of volume, if you're trying to play the volume or following a lot of picks or whatever it may be, mathematically, you're going to have 1 in 7 days, 0 in 6 days, and the emotional, like, not charge, but I guess discharge on you for having those bad runs. If you are unable to emotionally detach yourself from that, where you're not going to get your brain's going to check out and you're going to double up on a game, or you're going to chase, or you're going to be miserable, it's going to affect your home life, you're better off, cutting back on your volume or not trying to bet that. I remember there was a stretch back when my friend Scotty, he was the number 3 at Pinnacle, and this was years ago in college football, and he was sending me, 15, 20, 25 plays a week. And I'll never forget, it was sick. I was like 17-5. But I remember one week he literally was like 3-20. And I got destroyed. And even though I knew long term getting plays from a guy who was the number 3 at Pinnacle, who had a positive expectation, I never would bet his plays again. I would use them and write them down, and I would filter them out based off other things and lower the volume. And I know mathematically, or the Brian Leonards or RJ saying, if you have a positive expectation and you're getting something from a guy at Pinnacle, just blanket betting it. I wasn't able to do that because I couldn't disconnect myself from the emotional aspect of, I was like wanting to vomit. I was eating Tums like Rolaids. I wasn't wanting to go play with the kids. I didn't want to go out the wife. And it was affecting me socially and emotionally so much, I couldn't handle that. And to me, the emotional aspect goes like what you said, is the attachment to the teams, or maybe you make a bad decision where you're going to the game, you're thinking there's no way that the Lions could lose at home. That was me back in the day. But it also goes to the money. So say, taking it from a client aspect, if you're following a guy like Dave, who historically wins in baseball, if he's playing some volume and maybe he has a rough start to the day and he has a late game, if you can't do strict money management and not think to yourself, well, Dave's made money 3 years, there's no way he can go 0-4, and you triple your bet to get even. You know what? Dave can go 0-4. Yeah, Dave's made 100+ units over 3 years, but Dave could shit the bed. And to chase, because of that, that's emotional too. And Dave, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead and jump in.
No, I was just laughing. I said Dave can go 0-10.
Exactly.
See, that's the difference, and that's the hard part. That I think the pregame pros recognize it. The ones that are active and involved with the community, because you see the posts that aren't always positive when somebody loses a game or has a bad stretch. That's the difference between, if you run on a website where you didn't have that interaction, it would be easy to disconnect. But when you're also messing with other people's money, it's not easy to disconnect. And I've told people a number of times, people that I talk to privately or direct message on Twitter, I've just told them the same thing, that, how many, I feel badly for them when I lose money more than I lose my own.
Honestly, Dave, that's one of the things that for me has been the hardest part. Is the fact that when you do lose for the clients, that they spent money on your selections, and I guess it's a plus and minus for me because I run customer service, so I get the good, but then I also get the bad, and it's sometimes stressful to me because I do feel bad because the honesty part of it is ideally everybody win every game because me and RJ would be billionaires. But bad
well,
runs.
Then everybody would just get pissed that they're not featured every day, so you'd have another problem.
Really quick, it was funny is I had a general rule for a while when some of the Twitter stuff was getting out of control. For some of the pros, I had to make the comment. I said, "This is the rule: when the bottle of booze gets below the label, you have to sign off of Twitter for the night. If the bottle of booze is above the label, you're allowed to tweet. But once it reaches below that label, no more tweeting." So there's a lot of emotional stuff. And that's the thing, going back to a part of losing the money is, I deal with these guys, and this is on my kids, and I got 3 of them, and I love them to death. There has not been one pro who's been through a bad streak that hasn't been like literally stressed out and devastated on a bad run. I talked to Shaker on the phone when, he started shitting the bed in the baseball totals. I mean, he was sick to his stomach. I mean, didn't even want to, interact. I mean, he was just devastated. When VR had his basketball run, I mean, he was a basket case because he couldn't figure out, he was doing everything historically has done and he couldn't win. And I know, and to me, I don't want these guys to lose, and I never want people to lose money, especially the clients. But sometimes, going through those bad runs, to me, is going to, one, allow the pregame pro to not be lazy. Not saying they are, but if you're winning, you can kind of do the same old, same old. But once you start hitting a losing streak, it's going to make you look at your numbers. It's going to make it look at what you're handicapping. And, I had a long talk with VR today, and, he's been killing it in the football across everything. And we were going over, the weekend card and talking about Friday's game. And, he blanket told me that he has changed so much from that bad run that he's had in basketball that he's trying to lower the volume. And anyone who follows VR could see this. I mean, he's had a lot of days where he's passed because he's filtered out a lot of his games. So that being said, Dave, we're going to get to the next question. And, me and you were talking just before we went on the air about the SEC. After a few games into the season, who is your lead horse to win the SEC East?
Emotionally or logically?
Let's do
Emotionally,
both.
I'd love to see South Carolina win it just for the school, but I think you have to put Georgia up there, even if South Carolina beats Georgia. South Carolina's going to play, I think, LSU and Florida the next 2 weeks on the road. So they'd have to win one of those two. I'm not sure they're going to win either one. And after this South Carolina game against the Gamecocks, Georgia has literally nothing except the cocktail party in Jacksonville against Florida. So unless Florida beats Georgia, I think it's Georgia's to lose.
Florida looked pretty impressive against the Tennessee game. I was actually watching that game. I went down to I guess I went to whatever the hell the directions would be out west to see the Lions game, and I was at a sports bar and we were watching some college football. Florida looked pretty impressive. Tennessee got up. The game was pretty close early, and they just kind of took over. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on the Gators overall? Let's talk some Florida.
Um, I'm shocked at what they're doing right now, if you want my honest opinion. I did not see that coming. And when they started off with that bullshit game against Bowling Green where they not only damn near won, they damn near lost, I certainly didn't see them going out to Texas A&M and winning that game. And I was wrong about them. And for that reason, I think that they're probably actually have gone from one of the more undervalued teams to one of the more overvalued real quick with that Tennessee win. That was the game I didn't play because Tennessee looked too easy, and living in the South as long as I have, it's one of those things that you just know Florida always beats Tennessee. I don't care where they play or what the line is or who's favored by how many or who's hurt. Florida seems to always beat Tennessee. Tennessee knows it. I think they stress out. I kind of saw that coming, but I didn't have the balls to take Florida.
I'm Johnny Detroit. This is Dave Essler. We're going to go through a couple more questions. If you want to post one, you could use the pop-up control panel and do so. And I will ask Dave live on the air. From there, we're going to go to this best bet. Then we're going to go right to your coupon before we close things out. And real quick, Dave, before I get to the next question, you're talking Georgia, and we were talking earlier offline about the South Carolina, Missouri. Missouri was up 19-0 at the half in that game. Or I'm sorry, 10-9 against Georgia that game. And then Georgia came back in the second half and ended up blowing them out 41-20. What do you think was the major adjustments, or do you think it was, the whole, even in the bowl games, is, the SEC close game at halftime, second half comes out, and the athleticism just wears down those other teams. Do you think it was solely the athleticism of the Georgia team, or do you think it was the coaching? Like, what was the major difference that you went from a game with Missouri winning up by 1 at the half to Georgia closing it out, winning by 3 touchdowns?
I don't know that. I guess in my opinion, I think Missouri came out and played on total emotion. First SEC game, Georgia in there, who's a big SEC school. I think they played on emotion, which will carry only so far. It almost looked to me like they went in at halftime and said, "Holy shit, we might beat Georgia," and then actually came out and had to actually start thinking. Almost like the quarterback who does things instinctively, which you can do in a game like that, just based on 70,000 people telling you how great you are. Then when you go to halftime and you stop and you think, say, we're beating Georgia. And I think Georgia just kind of took it all in stride because they've been there, done that. No disrespect to Missouri, but I think the game was just too big for them. And I don't know that not from a talent level as much as the media and the pressure and whatnot. And I just don't think they were prepared for it once they had to actually start playing football.
I mean, the same thing is the Texas A&M game. They're up 17-10 against Florida. Florida shuts them out in the second half, and Texas A&M, they had the same issues last year in the second half. They ended up losing 20-17. So, on to the next question, Dave. What football stats help you most in handicapping the NFL?
Football stats.
When you're handicapping, what do you look at stat-wise when you're doing the NFL handicapping for your card?
Turnovers is about the only stat I really look at. Pass attempts, passing yards per attempt. I'm not a huge stat guy when it comes to the NFL. For me, that's a whole lot more situational. So turnovers is one, and passing yards per pass attempt would be number two. I guess what I'm trying to say is I don't sit there and break down how many rushing attempts versus how many. You know what I'm saying? I don't develop a model that takes stats into consideration in the NFL as much.
Well, I think NFL's like what you just said is the situational. Is NFL more than anything is the lines are the most accurate, in my opinion, of almost any sport. And the power ratings factor so many things in it. Those lines are so good that I think your edge is more of a situational type thing in the NFL where you can take advantage of situations. Where I think in college football, sometimes statistics in certain situations mean more because what an SEC school is doing versus an SEC school versus, say, some obscure conference, what their stats are, it's not the same. If you have an NFL team doing one thing and an NFL team doing something similar, it's almost apples to apples because even if a conference or a division is a little bit better than another team, these are still the best of the best in terms of players. The league is pretty much similar. Not to sound cliche, it's the any given Sunday type of thing. Where to me, if I got a guy throwing for 400 yards in the SEC, and then I got a guy throwing for 400 yards at Podunk University, and those two teams play, to me, the value with that SEC quarterback being able to put up 400 yards against that competition versus a quarterback being able to put 400 yards up against kids that can't play in the SEC, that's to me when you could use more statistical models and comparisons. Where the NFL, it's so factored in, and I'm not saying you can't use it, and I know some guys do. I just think the NFL, like you said, is more situational. Next question.
Well, the other thing, Johnny, is, and I talked with Gil when we do the guessing line show, is that I think the number last week was 11. 11 games where the spread did not matter in the NFL. Either the underdog won outright or the favorite won and covered. And obviously that's not the case in college football. That just kind of reiterates what you just said.
I think it's around, and there's a user, and I feel bad I don't remember his name off the top of my head. He updates me every week via email. But I think it's something like historically like 85 or 87% in the NFL that the team that wins outright also covers the spread. And it was interesting because I was pulling up the Arizona game and I paid, I think it was 6-1. I think they paid, it was like plus 600 at the 13.5 or whatever the line ended up being. And historically, teams that were getting that amount of points in the NFL, I think were something like 33 and 66 straight up, which mathematically, if you bet on them, even if it was near like, 50-50 against the spread or whatever it was. But if you're getting 6-1 on your money, if you just blanket bet on those teams over the history, you're talking if they won 33 times 6, less the 60-something times minus the 110 juice, you're picking up 30 units versus just betting them with the spread. So it is pretty interesting. I mean, the first thing is you got to be able to predict when a team like Arizona could win. But it was interesting to me because I always like playing the contrarian. And when he sent that to me saying, this week all you had to do was pick the winner, I was doing some research and I was going to counter and say, yeah, Well, historically, you're picking an obscure example because you picked Arizona, but if you just blanket bet every one of those teams, mathematically you're still going to lose money because you have to be psychic to pick it. And it was just weird pulling it up and seeing if you just blanket bet teams in that situation, you would have picked up 30 units, over the last 20 years because those teams, when they win, they pay so much. Another question, Dave, for you is if you had to take somebody who was trying to make the move from recreation and they weren't able to do it for, say, a living, so they couldn't emphasize full time where they're following stuff on Twitter, they're handicapping the whole card because, that's so time consuming. If somebody was a recreational handicapper wanted to move up just one level, what are some bits of advice of things to do, whether it's follow a certain conference, follow certain stuff on Twitter? How would you, I guess, tutor a young handicapper on some basics where it's not going to take over their life, but it's going to allow them to up their game a little bit?
Well, I think you already answered your own question when, you know as well as I do how much time this takes to do it thoroughly and properly. I mean, it's literally most of my waking hours. So following a conference or two, I mean, I don't think you can't spread yourself that thin. I don't care whether you're me or somebody that doesn't have the time I do. And I think if you're following a conference or two that you tend to know well anyway, you're also going to get more information on what you're doing wrong. I mean, I think you can build on that a whole lot easier. Because to me, it's all about, I mean, we're all pretty good at this at some point in time, but we all also make mistakes. And I think the only way to get better is not to find more winners, but to find less losers, i.e. make less mistakes. And the only way to make less mistakes is know exactly what you're doing. And the only way to know exactly what you're doing, if you have a limited amount of time, is to stick to the conference or two.
My advice is like you said, is, you know what, pick a conference. Next thing you do some research on Twitter and make yourself a Twitter list. Follow the beat writers. Follow the guys announcing the games. Follow the guys that have the blogs or the fan sites. And you create a list and follow all of those people. Next thing you do, create some bookmarks. Create one bookmark for all of the local newspapers. Create a bookmark for all the local fan sites. Then create stuff for the forums like at Rivals and Scouts. That alone will take up a chunk of your time and will make you understand to try doing this full time and do it correctly on how difficult it is. But if you could just do that and know everything about a conference, know what's going on in the practices, hearing stuff from the alumni and some obscure blog talking about practice or recruiting or certain players not getting along, 1 or 2 nuggets a week to make you look at a game differently, to me, will give you a huge edge. So if someone had to ask me, Johnny Detroit, what would you say is your best advice to up my game a little bit? Pick one conference and do what I said. Create the list on Twitter of everything to do with that team. Then bookmarks for all the local newspapers. Then one for all the fan and the blog sites. And just get in the habit of knowing everything going on about those teams. Because what's on ESPN for the most part is what's newsworthy. The fact that some guy had bad practice is never going to make SportsCenter. Go ahead, Dave.
No, and these days what's on ESPN is usually about 12 hours later than you can get it on Twitter or anywhere else.
Exactly.
And I think what you need to do once you've done that is you've got to go back when you miss games and look at what you missed so you don't miss it again.
That's a great point. So what we're going to do now, I'm sorry, Dave, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I mean, if you don't know where you made your mistakes, you can't get better. What did I miss? What did I not see? What happened that I didn't account for? You can't. I don't think you can blindly just pick up on a Saturday night and go into the following weekend without looking back. And even at some of the games you didn't play, that you should have, that you were right. Okay, what did I see that I ignored?
And that's one of the things that goes back to the beginning of the webinar is the whole up in your game. Is always think it's just because it was bad luck or a certain play. It's easy to point to the couple certain plays that cost you your game, but you don't subconsciously look at the plays that maybe went your way that allowed you to win. That stuff's going to balance its stuff out. There's going to be the occasional bad beat, But for the most part, like you said, is being able to look and break down a game and say, okay, what did I miss? Did I put too much emphasis on how good this offensive line was? Was I off base and overestimating the certain matchups? And that's going to allow you to look at it a different way. So what we're going to do now is we're going to get you an actual best bet for the weekend. We got about 15 minutes left, Dave. I'm going to go over a couple bullet points. If anyone has any questions on this, you could shoot them up and I'll get them to Dave. I'll go over the bullet points, hand it over to Dave. We'll get into the coupon, which will be good for the next 72 hours. You like the Miami Dolphins over the New York Jets. Obviously, the New York Jets just rolled an overrated, in my opinion, Buffalo Bills team. I really loved the Jets last week. I'm sorry, vice versa. The Jets are in a tough spot, having played and lost to a very physical team in Pittsburgh. Actually, I had that reversed. The Jets allowed 28 points at home to Buffalo, and the Jets have lost 8 of their last 10 road games, beating only Washington and Buffalo. And the Dolphins have now seen 2 weeks of this so-called new Jets offense on film. So, Dave, fill in the blanks. What's making you like Miami +3 over the Jets?
The Jets in Miami always play close games. I mean, it's not unlike that Tennessee-Florida thing. I mean, they just know each other so well. There aren't a lot of surprises, and I think I look back and I'm doing this from memory. I think the last 8 games they've played, I don't think there's been a spread of more than 3 or 3.5 points, and I don't think either team has won by more than 5 or 6. And home underdogs, I won't take them blind, but they certainly get a fair bit of looks from where I sit. And I've been down to Miami a fair bit, and until they got Tannehill and a little bit of sort of Dupas and Toronto left, they really didn't have a huge home field advantage. And I think after what they did to Oakland last week, which I did think they were going to win, but I didn't think they'd win as badly as they did, I think they're going to have a little bit more of a home field advantage than they might have otherwise had. So I like Miami to win the game straight up.
That's a great point. I actually did something on Miami. It was about a year or two ago, and I had a lot of people who were from the area and some local beat writers say exactly what you said. Is because there's so many transplants down there that they really didn't have a home crowd edge per se. And unlike other stadiums, and just real quick to correct myself, I was referring to the week 1 when the Jets blew out the Bills. Obviously last week they lost to the Steelers. Is being a Lions fan is Ford Field is when that crowd is rocking. When we beat the Bears on Monday Night Football, I read a lot of stuff that one of the reasons the Lions were able to dominate that game was how loud the crowd was. I was there at the Lions' last playoff win when they beat the Dallas Cowboys, and my parents were in Vegas, and they happened to be in an elevator with Jimmy Johnson, and the coach was talking to one of his friends, and his friend actually said to him, "Tough loss, coach." And Jimmy goes, "It was the loudest crowd I ever played in front of. It was so damn loud, we couldn't even call an audible." And, I was at the 49ers game when they beat the Lions last week, and it was crazy how loud it was. And I think that home thing with the crowd and understanding how crazy some of those fans could be, that can change a game. And Miami historically hasn't had it, so that's an interesting key point, is feeling like, they're feeling that they're turning the corner, per se, and for them to be able to beat Oakland. So before we get to the coupon, Dave, is there anything else you want to look ahead or add about this upcoming weekend?
Specifically,
and whatever floats your boat, it's your webinar.
I think this weekend in college, I think a lot of us, I mean, I've done mediocre in college. We're up or down a little bit one way or the other. But I think now that we've had 2 or 3 weeks in college and 2 weeks in the NFL, I think we got a better handle on a lot of who these teams really are. And I would expect a lot of us to do fairly well this weekend because of that. It's tough the first week. It's a little tougher the second week. The third week, you can kind of look back the last 2 weeks and see who some of these teams really are.
I have some friends actually in Vegas, and what you said is point on. Is a friend of mine who's part of a middling crew, and anyone's watched the videos with me and Frank, this is the group I'm talking about, is, they bet early on from stuff they're getting, but their actual stuff that they're betting big on, they don't really even start betting heavy their own stuff until week 3 and 4,
Right.
because a lot of their systems per se, and not systems. A team's 10-0 when the sun's coming in from the east, and Seinfeld has a rerun at 8 o'clock kind of trends or systems, but certain situational systems regarding the lines don't kick in to week 3 and 4. So what you said is point on. And that being said, anybody who is with us live, and I want to say appreciate everyone tuning in, and anyone who's going to watch us the next 24 hours, for the next 72 hours, the coupon code EsslerWeb, ESSLER Web, all one word, will get you 25% off any one purchase at the pregame site. You can use it to buy a daily package. You could buy a 7-day, a 30-day, an NFL, and that could be any handicapper. Obviously, we're going to say buy Big Dave this weekend because he's hosting the webinar, but you could use your one purchase on anything and anybody you choose, and it's going to be good for 72 hours. So for anybody watching this on the recap, this show is being taped on Wednesday, so it's going to be 72 hours from Wednesday. So if you catch this on Friday or Saturday, you want to rush to get it in there. And if you're listening to this after the fact, I guess too bad, too sad. So Dave, real quick, is there anything you want to add? And I guess as somebody watching this, seeing the 25% off coupon, and I know you're a super humble dude. I mean, you're always patting on the back of all the other pros. You spend a lot of time. I know you and Goodfellow have a great relationship. I mean, you guys break down and handicap a lot of the games together. I mean, you're not a cutthroat dude whatsoever. And, I've been doing business with you for a couple years. So I need to take you out of your mode for a second. And you tell me, why should I invest with Dave Essler this weekend?
Wow. I didn't see that coming.
You're too nice of a guy, Dave. I need you to be marketing Dave.
I know. That just takes way too much energy. Why should you? Because I think what I put out is quality information. I would never say I have more quality information than anyone else or better than anyone else. But again, people that buy and picks are getting information from me, and I was a pick buyer, so I think I understand the mindset of at least the majority of the pick buyers. I mean, obviously they all have different expectations, but I don't put them out because I just need to put out a pick. I put them out because I've researched them as well as I think they can be researched, win, lose, or draw.
And that's one of the things, Dave, is, if I don't see a package up or whatnot, I don't ever go and say, hey, you got to put something up. I always got to make sure the guy's alive still and check in and say, how's everything going? And you on multiple times said, hey, you know what? I could probably put something up and make some cash, but I don't really like the card today. And, I remember there was a time you were under the weather and you didn't have something up. And it was you literally told me, I can't put in the time where my conscience will allow me to ask someone to spend money on my product. And people have to respect that. In my mind, is if you see something up from Dave for sale, it's something that he feels is worth putting up for sale. He's not doing it just to make a buck. And
I've been asked that question a bunch. Why do I do it? Because most people know I don't need the money. I do it because it's fun. I enjoy interacting with most of our clients. And I do it because I think I can put out a quality product. It's that simple.
And you know what? What you hear and what you see with Dave is what you get. So I'm Johnny Detroit. He's Dave Essler. Don't forget, this will be loaded up in the forums in case you missed anything. Dave has some big stuff up already. You can check him out at pregamepros.com. Go right to his homepage. Also, don't forget, your coupon will be good for that 25% off for the next 72 hours. I'm Johnny Detroit. He's Dave Essler. I want to say thanks to everyone who tuned in. And as always, from me to you, best of luck.